You ever feel the earth shift beneath your feet, and then realize it hasn't, but something inside you has irrevocably moved? Yeah, that was me. Just another Tuesday evening, holding a peeler, watching carrots roll onto the kitchen counter, and hearing my wife hit me with words sharp as kitchen knives. You know what your problem is? Danielle sneered, her hand on her hip like a movie villain. Why so much contempt spilled from someone who'd once smiled so lovingly was beyond me. You're just beige. I blinked. Beige? I'd heard worse in the tech industry. And then she did it, tossed her suitcase, wheels squealing against the hardwood, out the door like she was staging a prison break. A flash of red lipstick, tight jeans, and suddenly nothing was as it had ever been. You what now? I asked, wiping carrot shavings off my fingers. The peeler clattered to the floor, aptly timing my shot at a more dramatic pause. Chad's waiting outside. Miami, here I come. She sang out the last words like a soundtrack to my personal horror flick. You could practically hear a guitar riff in the background, maybe even one of those drum solos that mean pay attention. Chad, I thought. The human manifestation of a protein shake, standing by the curb in a souped-up convertible. The guy knew how to pose like he was eternally in an Abercrombie ad. I'll give him that. As she sashayed toward the door, Danielle stopped for a pause, Shakespeare-esque, either for emphasis or sabotage. Her eyes flicked to my hand, now holding an apparently inconspicuous white envelope. Take it, I said, my voice suddenly as flat as Nebraska, no hint of bitterness, no pitched anger. Just a gesture. For when you're ready. She took it, tossed it into her oversized bag without a second glance, like it was a receipt from a long-forgotten purchase. She didn't care at that moment, too busy with her whirlwind escape plan into what she'd later discover to be a mess masquerading as Chad's world. And then she left, leaving behind not only carrot peelings but a life we constructed with semi-professional precision. Shock slapped me across the face, and the sound of wheels screeching away was just the applause at the end of my theater of absurdity. I stood alone, the silent echo of an opening refrigerator filling the space she'd vacated. Beige, she'd called me. Perhaps I was, but only because I'd allowed it, shoving larger dreams into smaller boxes, just so she'd have more room to blossom. I bent down, picked up the peeler, half wondering if it too was crying betrayal, but no, it was just a peeler. An ordinary Tuesday overwhelmed by extraordinary events. The envelope, now gone, was the ticking time bomb I knew would one day explode in a theater of poetic justice. So there it was. Danielle and Chad. Miami bound. Meanwhile, I had a backlog of Netflix shows and a single-family dwelling slowly slipping into haunted house territory. Still, for what it's worth, the carrot soup that night was exceptional. The tension in our life, like the thin line over which a circus performer dances on a tightrope, began subtly, but with each passing moment, it became a high-wire act of hidden motives and strategic disclosures. I hadn't said goodbye to her, not with words. I didn't even bury my feelings, and that was the interesting part. For once, I swallowed what I really wanted to say because I knew, deep down, she wasn't going to like the aftertaste. What can I say? One can only hope for hurricanes when there's nothing but clear skies ahead. Those were on the horizon for Danielle, lush green promises of upheaval and seismic change. But for me, I just planted my feet, dug into my TechWork patience reserves, and heard the unseen reveal itself, waiting for when the clouds would finally open up to rain, something caustic or cleansing, still unclear. All that was left was for her to open the envelope, and the world she was trying to spin around Chad would begin an unexpected turn back towards me. The twist was in movement, and the impending revelations would taste far from the predictability of beige. Danielle's Instagram was on fire. It made wildfires look like a candlelight vigil. All this drama from a digital haze, flickering on my laptop screen like ominously backlit rabbit holes. A journey in sizzling snapshots, Miami sun blazing, bikini shots that might have inspired lesser men to take up art, poolside cocktails balanced on impossibly toned abs. Not her abs, mind you, Chad's, who's made being a cliché part of his lifelong fitness regimen. Her smile? Radiant, dazzling even, but that wasn't the shock. Her followers couldn't get enough, showering her with heart eyes emojis like confetti at a parade she had forgotten to tell me she was leading. One comment, in particular, caught my eye like a fleeting spark in the pretentious fireworks display of her newfound freedom. The words read, "He'll do to her what he did to me," signed by someone I eventually identified as one of Chad's many exes, Alex. Call it digital detective work or just sheer curiosity, I took a screenshot, archiving it like a tax receipt I knew would be important later. Yeah, funny, right? I sipped my slowly cooling coffee, contemplating just how much to follow up on this breadcrumb trail left by a presumably disillusioned ex-lover. There was something methodical, almost Hawkeye from M*A*S*S*H-like in my emotional cleanup. Hurt buffered with stoic resolve? You bet. No use playing the violin when your emotion coach had you all geared up for warfare. I could practically smell the gunpowder from a mile away, labeled in this case as request pending. What's that about pain making you stronger? Not sure I was aiming for beefcake status, but mentally, sure thing, my fortress of stoic acceptance was reinforced by layers of bricked-over compassion and mortar made from unshed tears. So very sepia-toned. Let's face it, Chad was a pattern in her life, neatly laid down like carpet. And Alex's breadcrumb was the first detailed note I found in this symphony of disconnect. Danielle's life was like a meticulously phrased tweet, intentionally ambiguous, just begging for more characters to be allowed so truth could spill out like syrup over unsavored pancakes left in the rain. What was Paul preparing? A good question on both sides of this screen divide. Well, my process was distinctly unglamorous, a slow reveal of necessity and calculated renovation around a life I knew could be infinitely redesigned. I didn't manically scroll through Instagram for hours, mindlessly absorbing the dopamine hits as if they could replace real human connection. Instead, I gathered evidence, cataloged details as if tasked with the world's most lackluster Sherlock routine. You see, when someone tries to paint you the antagonist with vividly flawed acrylics, subtlety becomes your savior. In a flip-the-script flurry worthy of any community theater performance, the best part was that Danielle, she never noticed where her life and liberty became part of a larger story, unfolding page by page due to her own subconscious contribution. So here's a hint. She wouldn't be seeing what was coming from me, not a glimpse nor a foreshadow. With every pixel preserved on the digital canvas, every tagged location on social media carefully pinned like world domination plans on a Bond villain's wall map, slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Aside from saving screenshots, I downloaded a checklist of life-defining moves, ready to step each play out of formation. Because let's face it, the real prize wasn't to claim victory from the trophies of another's mistakenly engineered loss. The real game was in watching the storyline unravel for all its worth, strategic disclosures input, patiently, competitively, emotion squashed under restraint. While Danielle reveled in the digital haze of likes and comments, I was quietly sketching a new blueprint for my life. This wasn't about reinventing myself, no wild sabbaticals to Bali or extravagant purchases of impractical sports cars. It was about recalibrating, as subtle as the turning of our thermostat in winter, and just as vital. The guest room seemed like a good place to start, mostly because it was emblematic of our shared neglect. Already half-stripped of wallpaper, a metaphor none too subtle about what had been happening between us over the years. I attacked it with purpose, moving seamlessly between spackle and paintbrush. This wasn't a fixer-upper fueled by emotional breakdown. It was a calculated maneuver with an endgame in mind. In the backyard, strings of lights blinked into existence as if to whisper tales of promises remade under open skies. I added a fire pit, inviting flames that could melt away the awkward silences and punctuate laughter when it returned home. This was where transformation blossomed, like orchids in springtime, or so I convinced myself. It was time to move in sync with what was genuinely beautiful around me. Ignore the pale shadows left by Danielle's departure, those faint outlines dotted with questions. The way forward demanded the strength not of denial, but of honest acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that history could write itself anew. And through this period of silent construction and thoughtful addition, I found company not so much in people but life's changed canvas. A quieter resolve stirred as I cleaned out the garage, organizing what didn't fit anymore in my everyday chaos. Then, when my fingers had all but memorized every wall and corner of my reconstructed mind palace, I did something I hadn't considered much before. I reached for my phone, though not with reckless speed nor urgent impulse. Instead, there was calm deliberation as I scrolled contacts as you might course through a well-worn book. Familiar, comforting, nothing unexpected in its table of contents. A text, simple as Jell-O salad at a summer picnic, sent to our realtor. Let's talk about selling. That was the sum of it, weighty with intent yet featherlight in execution. Did my imaginary audience cheer? Did it guffaw? Couldn't tell you. Except this act, small in my internal hierarchy of decisions, meant setting sail on waters uncharted, and I was immensely okay with that. Outwardly, my life retained its mundane rattle, a systems analyst's predictable march through deadlines and financial spreadsheets. But inside, tectonic plates of intention quietly shifted landscapes like seismic magic. Answers? I was not exactly brimming with novel definitions, but somewhere, smeared between guideposts and invisible ink, lay ideas untested until that point. Who was this for? No one asked directly, but perhaps they were aware through unspoken astuteness. The reason for my quiet remodeling was neither for keeping nor exclusion. It was a summons to move beyond the opaque residue Danielle unknowingly flung in her wake. Each nail driven into boards, each polished piece of furniture, it measured this living tapestry without the overbearing glare of worn-out narratives. Rather than ripping it apart, I was stitching carefully through its foundational fabric. Change, as ever, came not as parade in celestial splendor, but softly, a whisper beneath newly hung curtains, embraced not as victory, but as sequence renewed. She never called. None of them did. The absence was an answer enough, echoing in the space outside expectation's reach. Silence was a soothing balm, and in that absence arose clarity encircling the heart with elegance. When you plan without haste, results become surprises you can actually delight in. And oh, what delightful wonders awaited discovery in a mind's rethink. I had become a cartographer of new things, slowly charting an evolving map. It was the kind of voicemail that leaves a hint of contrition mingling with unintended arrogance, the kind that has you wondering whether they really meant to apologize or were just brushing away nagging worries like a fly at a picnic. 3 weeks in from Danielle's abrupt exodus, her voice crackled through the earpiece, bridging the divide between gone for good and maybe I'm still in play. "Hey, you okay?" she began, deceptively breezy, as though our life hadn't been expertly disassembled with a crowbar, then reassembled elsewhere, minus yours truly. Her tone dipped briefly into genuine curiosity, as if suddenly remembering an old friend's birthday by mistake. "Just checking. Screen off. Phone tucked away." Her words a faint reverberation rather than the concussive force she perhaps imagined. My thumb hovered over reply, but faltered in the air. "No, let's save it. Store it with snapshots of darting fish, claiming the aquarium of Dan's world gone by." There was plenty room there after all. If she assumed I was sulking, it was because she couldn't stretch her imagination to weave narratives outside her starring role. How, after all the years together, could she see past the confines she'd constructed around me? There she imagined me, Paul, fraught with silent longing, perhaps martyred and eternally beige. Yet irony unfolded like lily petals on the surface of cool water, as across the openness, Chad's supposed novelty began to tarnish. Oh, he was a great starter's block. Chad was a jolt of adrenaline and endorphins. But like any great joyride, its appeal dulled quickly under the weight of everyday reality, which tasted far different under breakfast light. More importantly, the cracks began to form. Fine lines calculated not in days or hours, but in missed dinners and diverted attention spans. Chad's thumb slipped down his phone's screen, not rebellion, but foreshadow. Like dark cone's descent, from starlit glory to shadowed slump, his presence clicked out from full-stretched narrative arc. Danielle, probably full of selfies partially eclipsing sunsets, began to perceive the shape-shifting distance seeping in. But by then, it wasn't enough, nor up to her sense of improvisation, to recraft the story with adequate vigor. A subtle disenchantment over ambitious nightclub beats. Their dream had frazzled into something inherently lonely. The very reverie she'd abandoned now slightly mirrored. Isn't it funny when unreliable storylines overlap? Unwritten scripts and plot twists defy authorial control? This was neither orchestrated by poetic design nor played for tragedy. It was life's grand, unabashed sense of irony unfolding in slow motion. Chad, scrolling through augmented realities, drifting away faster than once briefly incandescent smiles. He became that digital ghost, more immersed in games played through blue-lit screens than dances shared beneath Miami stars. For Danielle, During those dim evenings, she must have sensed it. Silence creeping between them like fog rolling off distant seas, engulfing their happily ever after in a quietly swallowing depth. The sheen of excitement could so easily lift, exposing plain varnish beneath. Meanwhile, I invested in opportunities to step outside, breathe in new perspectives, the way you might draw in air after too long underwater. No more second-act speeches, just finite movement through shadows of my own creation, feeling roots grow firm. I didn't have answers or callbacks to her voicemail artistry. In truth, none were required on my end, only for Chad, skipping over the puzzle pieces. By then, all I was compelled to do was observe the drift, not as a participant, but as an oddly neutral bystander. Realization knocks differently on the doors of those expecting fierce battles. She may have believed herself the warrior, awaiting my albeit flawed defense. On the contrary, she received from me merely the coolest liberating breeze, finding herself alone to face untold serenades. I'd freed myself from the confines of script, winter coat, thrown carelessly towards sun-kissed future days. One morning, Danielle awoke to a blaring alarm, not from her clock but from her financial app. Overdraft alerts greeted her like unwelcome guests, unfurling red flags in her mental landscape. Panic is an insidious creature, sneaking in right between sleepy, tangled sheets and blinked-awake reality. Chad, the male model of misplaced enthusiasm, was not beside her. No text messages perched with charming rationalizations awaited on her phone. The closet, once bursting at its seams with overconfident jackets and clunky sneakers, now mocked her with empty hangers and soupy shadows. Gone was the man whose bravado had captivated her like hypnotic stage lights in a theater of dreams. All he'd left was a single insipid note, slapped impromptu across the bathroom mirror. Reflecting back at her, a bare litany, sans punctuation. It's not you. It's the chase. Pushing her through annoyance into desperation, the narrative shift seemed surreal for Danielle. Friends, those who earlier gifted her post-treacle-laden praise, now retreated as camaraderie crumbled beneath unforeseen burdens. Her parents, voices always critical but intent on tuning, unwilling to support symphonies clumsily hacked out on off-key strings. The context slipped sideways. When love that had been embroidered upon tidy social media TV came undone, she was left adrift. Sense of purpose twisted achingly out of reach as she fell into private conflict, a wordless sunken orbit. Only one number lingered persistently in the kaleidoscope of old contacts. The one line not sheathed in reproach or mistakes, with memories untangled by accusation. Mine. Would she call me? Curiosity toyed with compassion, both seasoned with heady sprinkles of "I told you so" phrases best left unprinted. Within her carefully constructed safe haven, reality morphed into mundane confrontation. The jigsaw pieces rattled. Was she too proud? I didn't count on pride, didn't bother anymore aligning myself with symmetrical goals. The fact was simple. This was no tapestry of my weaving, yet I'd been part of its fabric. Dare you to pull my threaded designs? There, in those lines of decision alone, the tension built, not spiteful, but energetically present. The unmaking of grand misadventures rests upon the shoulders of their architects, who must contemplate their skeletal frameworks in the waning shadow of once overestimated pursuits. Danielle was feeling out emotional thresholds, a new understanding between the meaning of return calls and running harried aimlessly through superficial mists. What reason now pushed her toward resolution? No longer media promptings nor peer reviews, only a more intimate grist unique to her smudged perspectives. Would she break the silence? Each day stacked against its predecessors, holding lessons learned, those etches into emotional woodwork invisible to anyone but the artisan who discovered them as complementary tools shed light on an evolving dialogue. I carried no need, no urgent desire to envelop her story once more. A tender thread, perhaps, got shared between softer memories resonating with gentle cadence. Yet, as her past ricocheted between cosmic drift and urgent awakening, the stage awaited re-entrance. The answer waited beyond simple text, subway tickets untouched in the locked drawer. Whether it arrived as concealed revelation or mundane missive depends largely on one's particular perspective. I remained poised, with hands in pockets, to witness the final denouement of such patchwork dreams woven of second chances. The sky was weeping as Danielle appeared at my doorstep, rain painting her an ethereal but bedraggled masterpiece. Her mascara trailed down her cheeks in melancholic black rivers, and her hair, normally a cascade of carefully curated curls, was a weather-tossed tempest. A pathetic fallacy if ever I saw one. "Can we just talk?" she asked, dripping water onto the welcome mat, her voice laced with a hesitance that hung between us like mist. I hesitated deliberately, allowing the seconds to stretch like taffy between us. It was enough for the scene within my house to echo softly. A woman's voice, warm and assured, carried the scent of a home reordered. "Babe, tea or coffee?" The words floated from the kitchen, unfurling golden threads across the gray tension at the door. Danielle's wide eyes seemed to darken with each syllable, realization striking her with palpable weight. There it was, a realization, an unpalatable truth she could barely swallow. It wasn't just the cold rain chilling her memory of us, but the tangible heat of life within. I finally stepped aside, the soft light of my hallway glowing like a heartfelt beacon. "The rain's heavy," I said, handing her my umbrella rather than an invitation. Savoring her chilly dejection with a bare hint of welfare, this wasn't what she'd expected to find. "You'll want an umbrella." Her breath hitched, her lips a perfect study in half-told stories. She looked at the umbrella with a mixture of appreciation and grief, a powwow of yesterday's promises shattered against today's realization. I replaced her picture of imaginary me, a figure of past stability, with something far more opaque, something less reachable. In that moment, roads diverged, not just in intent, but purposefully crafted distance. There was no road back to where everything seamlessly started. A pause, its edges as sharp as broken glass shards. I realized then that sometimes tragedy doesn't play out with explosions but with whispers. I closed the door gently, the lock sliding with an affirming click that reverberated cleanly through the cool evening. There's something profoundly symbolic about closure that doesn't announce itself with grandiose action, but instead renders closure through simple absence. Behind that door, Danielle stood awash in realization, lost in the arms of a past that no longer held tight. Inside, the house hummed with reassuring warmth. Strings of laughter intertwined through its bones, so alive it seemed. The lady calling about tea or coffee, she laced presence with kindness, while the rhythms adapted into new cadence behind softly glowing rooms. Had Danielle expected the solitude of an old life once inhabited? An easy ride back on a bridge burned at both ends? Behind curtains not drawn, I imagined her contemplating how the ground shifted without being seismic. Thunder in the distance, perhaps. I hadn't replaced Danielle, not as one replaces an appliance or becomes acolyte in rituals undone, but I'd found something immensely liberating to fill spaces once cluttered with disproportionate shadows. Through my door, a new life devoid of semblance, awakened courageous beyond mere habitation. Danielle's spiral was softly illuminating, a lighthouse on her personal horizon that drew attention not towards brave new worlds we neither sought nor needed. I wondered how the storm may have calmed around her feet, her weathered heart form forged with an unexpected clarity. The envelope, that small, unassuming tether to what had been, a parcel of prescience awaiting Danielle's awareness, finally submitted its secrets. Her hand shook slightly as she slit the seal, as though unearthing something ancient and sacred, the act a rite of passage into an uncomfortable truth. Inside lay a screenshot of a transfer, a significant amount, $45,000, painstakingly noted beneath. It was labeled simply, gift. No strings. The implication was clear, a safety net woven of shadows she'd ignored while spinning daydream illusions elsewhere. Below it, a printed message, my own handwriting tracing words steady and thoughtful. "I knew you'd choose him. This is your freedom fund. Use it wisely." Each letter was a planting, a garden long planned in hope amidst understanding. As her eyes darted over the lines, a sticky note slipped free, a formality from my lawyer confirming that the prenup, our invisible safety net, had already processed unencumbered. It bore the final act in the theater of our shared drama, now playing its last refrain. Regret rippled through her, an emotion so tangible she could almost cut it with a knife. How many ropes had she burned, then turned to find herself navigating upstream alone, the scent of ash trailing behind. The envelope was revelation, setting boundaries unspoken, defining space once shared. Why, she must be wondering amidst the mounting guilt, had I helped her even after betrayal etched itself indelibly between us. That question hung poised, a damning presence unmetered by time or circumstance, no defined answer giving in return, a natural kink in the sequence. Truth is, when you recognize the pathways someone is drifting along, you might be inclined to show them a glimpse of the map, drawing lines towards safer passages, even if you cannot walk them together. Offering support doesn't always arise as an expectation fulfilled, but rather empathetic connection extending pinions where needed. As the walls gently whispered goodbyes, she acknowledged her own hand in transactions that intersected lives. All she had believed part of her new existence away from ours seemed so much like sand slipping through tightly clutched fingers, waves crashing against worn memory stones. Pragmatic contemplation drew the contrast, lighting up pieces of a larger puzzle straddling reality and ambition. The one light between realization and where she knew me last had crafted questions without easy answers. Danielle stood in the company of her own reflections, not unexpectedly. I was not hero nor villain, just a conductor, making sense of harmonious dissonance and comfort in echoes. To cast anger at one who sought recognition in a chorus unfamiliar, it wasn't my choice to define. That gift had always been something freely given, and through it, therapy ensued unlooked for. The freedom I afforded her was no cage covered in Baroque projections, a door once closed occupied instead by gratitude. Always secure my own footing while extending a lifeline. Perhaps hope wasn't simply flower without roots overgrown. Neither was compassion a guise spread thin within formalities and legal lines. I intended nothing should stand yet in our way. Her understanding deepened while deliberate steps fell into rhythmic acceptance. There was freedom in bold, measured purpose, cloaked not in pastel sensitivity but brazen hues of rediscovery. I by no means stood at center stage but offered lessons carved in delicate whispers, overlooked with every unturned envelope signifying tomorrow's promise. The universe has a curious sense of humor, doesn't it? It seemed that everywhere I went, Danielle was there, an omnipresent ghost woven into the fabric of my everyday life. Grocery store aisles turned into unexpected meeting grounds, where awkward hellos danced around pyramids of apples and broccoli. Gas stations became havens of stilted conversations built on foundations of the past, with echoes of everything unsaid reverberating louder than car engines could muster. Even at the gym, my sanctuary rebuilt from solitude, there she appeared, a specter from memories carefully archived and indexed. "Paul, please," she'd murmur, her voice barely rising above the mechanical whir of treadmills, her presence less a storm and more a drizzle seeking permanence on the windshield of my present. It was both endearing and exasperating in equal measure, this persistent specter of our shared history weaving itself through the present. There was a desperation cloaked in determination that she wore like a fading designer coat, frayed at the edges from overuse. "I'm seeing someone," I found myself saying more than once, words spared ample room to breathe between the weights and benches. Purposefully vague, I wanted not to craft false tales but establish healthy boundaries in our unfinished conversation. Her return volley often came in the shape of a piercing question, sharpened by jealousy and something close to longing. "Is she younger?" The inquiry wasn't crafted to wound but unearthed truths buried under layers of dispassionate narrative. "She's real," was the answer I allowed, an embodiment of the intricate tapestry that had blossomed in the wake of our mutual undone. A relationship defined not by the reconstructed past, but by its own unique momentum, propelled forward by authenticity. Danielle's expressions would flit through subtle stages, disappointment shadowed by the glow of realization. The game she looked to play was no longer in my repertoire. Those pieces longed to dust as new boards were constructed with unfamiliar rules. I suspect she believed she could mend frayed connections, tethered tenuously to nostalgia woven with regret. But even experts know, in threadbare narratives, some segments refuse comfortable repetition regardless of desperate hope. Her strategy so evidently faltered amidst these encounters, her resolve bearing the cracks of a vessel pushed through rapids it wasn't built to withstand. As each interaction bore witness to storylines unbidden by scriptwriters, our juxtaposition became more viable yet removed. I was neither amused nor drawn to rekindle affections subtly declined. This wasn't hostility, I simply didn't fit the layered narrative she'd half-fashioned, half-constructed from bits of scrapbooked imagery under rainy sky hues. There's something distinctly liberating about refusing unwelcome roles written in bravado letters of longing. Our shared perceptions cultivated lessons steeped in truth through interior echoes, lessons I embraced with forthright resolve. Danielle's pursuit was ceaseless, but I moved serenely through my redesigned existence, unafraid of her desire to maintain peripheral connection. Knowing when to stand firm is altogether more difficult than continuing prior performance. Some people are meant for one chapter, others for the whole book. She posted online with the flame of rekindling ambition intent on swaying invisible observers. But real life wasn't Instagram poetry, nor spaces between bookbinding where reality entwined. It was there, in the swirling tendrils of lived truth, that reassurance awaited. Instructions of old played trite like dissonant echoes among musicians improvised across new stages, and audiences sought renewal on whispers of steadfast freedom unforeseen. Danielle took to the digital realm for supplication, a modern confessional in the guise of a poignant post. Her latest lament stirred with emotionally charged vagueness. Some people are meant for one chapter, others for the whole book. It was the sort of reflective inquiry even she might have skimmed over once, but now it bore an unexpected weight, like a gravity well pulling unwary astronauts toward it. The comments came flooding in, an avalanche of public scrutiny and sympathetic gestures. "He's better without you," one remarked, the empathy cutting through the digital noise like sonar revealing submerged wrecks. But then, among them appeared Chad's latest muse, a new voice in the melange that shattered any facade Danielle had painstakingly curated. "Didn't you say he was too old and too boring to your friends?" The comment gleamed among other digital debris, like a broken bottle casting a jagged shadow on sand, attached with screenshots tangibly damning. Each image, crisp and unyielding, unraveled what threads she'd woven about her narrative's anachronistic protagonist. Danielle's heart must have skipped beats, faltered timing on a metronome meant for precision, now dancing arrhythmically among its own counterpoints. The social image she'd so carefully constructed began crumbling with all the fervor of a sandcastle meeting high tide, the game of perception undone by reality's firm hand. I watched this unfold, a spectator at her orchestrated spectacular failure. Nothing in me reveled in her public unmasking. Humiliation isn't an artful consequence. It is a splintering of moral compasses when true north suddenly points elsewhere, promising to derail. To see what Instagram had become, a coliseum of judgment and virtual smiles masking unseen cruelty, was fulfilling nothing more than a prediction once whispered to myself on lonely nights. Here, connection's fragile web turned to gossamer threads breaking under tension never meant to bear truth's weight. In Danielle's imagined kingdom, her subjects turned unruly, pointing fingers sprung from sockets formerly filled with like buttons. Screenshots supplanted old allegiances with new scorn, jettisoning innocence born from unchecked vanity. This was the world's fickle correlation, exposing intimacies for all to view and dissect. What was private became colossally evident in mere heartbeats, gritty splinters parading as insights meant to go deeper than surfaced bruises. For Danielle, the revelation permeated deeper than consciousness intended. Her once carefully constructed narrative lay adrift on oceans no longer willing to host passage. Simple lyrics of displaced affection couldn't resound against crashing tides seeking grounded truth. Her own convolution was thus revealed to bear emotional carpenters planning asunder by the very tools with which she'd once confidently navigated burgeoning narratives. Spectators bore witness to what unfolded, sliding into choreographed darkness and light unintentional audiences scarcely recognized. I never intended great reveals, nor orchestrate a premeditated takedown. Danielle's misstep into the court of public opinion felt inevitable, played less as cinematic contrivance, more as fate's gentle alignment with pathways twice stumbled over. She was left to navigate this maze called consequence, unraveling her tapestry of melodious masquerade to stand unadorned in truth. For me, it was less about the cascade of events and their unfolding drama. It was the recognition that narrative alone didn't define the path beneath one's feet. As she battled through remnants of illusion shattered by insight's clean cut, I turned inward, focusing on a life imagined, not captured through lens but felt within, resounding and unbroken. While echoes reverberated against hollow chambers, revelations broke gently against introspection's peace. That night, a gentle drizzle accompanied Danielle as she sat at the curb outside my house. Her thoughts must have been storm-tossed, much like the weather. Streetlights cast her in a pool of muted gloom, shadows that seemed as heavy as whatever weighed on her mind. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her before the headlights illuminated the path. Her silhouette was solitary but dense with complexity, an unresolved figure amidst the backdrop of my subtly reordered life. "I just want to know, why didn't you fight for me?" Her voice carried across the rain-dampened evening, reaching me through the open window like fragmented music from an old, beloved song. I paused, my gaze lingering on her, considering the question that hung heavy between us like a bridge not yet crossed. It was a simple query on the face of it, but layered beneath were strata of history, ambition, regret, and hope. I did, I replied, stepping out into the evening chill, each footfall deliberate as a punctuation mark. As I walked towards her, a calm assurance settled over me, a peace I hadn't anticipated but warmly accepted. The moment I let you go. Those words were not sharp or bitter, they were soft-edged truths, smooth pebbles found on the shores of old arguments washed clean by retreats into new seas. They illuminated more than just my resolve. They bathed our story in the pale light of shared understanding, where histories couldn't cage futures untethered from regret. Her expression wavered between understanding and yearning, the type adorned not by the judging crowd but the theater of self-assurance re-examined. I saw her shoulders sag under conclusions drawn phase by phase through nightly revelations reflecting once perceived truths. She remained seated on rain-slick concrete, watching as I moved past the specter of our shared narrative into something wholly my own, fragile yet founded on terra firma no tumultuous downpour could undermine. I walked inside, leaving the door open just long enough for echoes of camaraderie within the house to reach her ears. Synchronized laughter mixed with the gentle clink of cups being readied, a tableau composed of everyday symphonies attuned to balance. Inside, life hummed its new rhythms. The experiences we once had woven together stayed dormant behind closed doors, vanishing into echoes. My home was different now, touched by the warmth of these present lives interconnected through a shared pulse, not by chains of expectation but liberated presence. Danielle, amidst the genesis of truths learned, went unheard by no one other than herself. Her question didn't need an answer marked in jagged script. Our definitions could be relics of past coexistence, and instead of validation through transparency, sincere empathy bore witness alone. The lessons learned within pathways of newfound certainties, hers intermingling with mine, whispered quietly through silvered spaces and midnight interludes shared with purpose. The lights within my home-bathed rooms in benevolent glow triumphed not on upmanship but confidence through completion boundless. I never looked back toward the shadowed figures cast beneath streetlights, knowing introspection would bind our tales mere shades apart. When footsteps on rain-kissed walk blurred into another timeline untethered from bitter leitmotifs, I took a breath, firm and resolve born anew. Through this subtle revelation, the mist between decision branches cleared, offering sanctuary in woven artistry undefined by expectation, unclouded and free. Danielle's world tilted once more when she saw me on the news. There I was, unexpectedly splashed across local television, then filtered through a national lens, looking every bit the part of a figure reborn from the remnants of personal turmoil. The segment, initially just a filler piece for a feature on new community initiatives, spotlighted my journey reinvented, an amalgamation of quiet nights spent laying bricks and the exceptional camaraderie that blossomed from shared narratives. 58-year-old builds retreat for men healing after divorce, blared the headline alongside footage of my transformed backyard, the very space she'd once regarded as simply adequate. Now, it was a sanctuary, replete with lush landscaping and serene paths, each feature a brushstroke on the canvas I'd steadily crafted. Photos introduced the world to the vibrant community that thrived here, men at varied crossroads gathered not in shared defeat, but blossoming rebirth. My new partner, her bright smile wide enough to eclipse yesteryear's shadows, stood by my side. We were surrounded by laughter that spoke of quiet triumphs, not just mine but those of every soul who tread the retreat's new, hallowed ground. Danielle, watching from the stillness of her life dismantled of its perceived certainties, couldn't help but notice. This wasn't simply about personal evolution, it was an orchestration of melioration, a symphonic harmony emerging from previously silenced noise. I hadn't just moved on. I'd expanded beyond narrations told from within columns of defeat. There was no overt message on the broadcast, no veiled allusions to our shared past. Just testimony to resolve and growth etched in this fresh narrative from which she'd willingly absented herself. For her, watching from afar, shock assimilated itself into cognition, knowledge slowly percolating reality's fortuitous mutations. What she saw wasn't a man mired in beige repetition but one dynamically outlined, life adorned in vibrant hues she couldn't comprehend as part of her original palette. While her illusions dissolved into the ether, What emerged was something soul-stirring and distinctly elemental, a panorama where purpose and passion reconciled through perseverance blazed trails of newfound territories. The imprint left in her consciousness resonated long past the news segment, as her gaze fixed upon a vision of what could have been, had she chosen differently. But it was essential that my project wasn't born from spite. It was birthed from a yearning to change the dialogue into reconciliation through rupture once deemed ruinous. I had built not simply framework, but philosophical pathways encouraging formidable disclosures of light within our shared darkness. Danielle involuntarily mirrored not my partner, but her reflection on an unseen TV screen. A brief contemplation wrought of loss glittered with distance. I couldn't sense her immediate reaction. Those private moments stayed beyond my purview. And as my focus returned to the celebratory smiles surrounding me, our collective energy seemed unassailable in its authenticity, accents of sincerity draping earthly connectiveness over each metaphorical branch. In that broadcast, I recognized everything never allowed it to feather into intent or retribution. I hadn't reinvented solely for replacing life's original stage. My work laid newer tracks along a broader field open to infinite intersections and radiant continuum present throughout time. Danielle bore witness to the buds flourishing around me without needling for acknowledgement. The air streaming between our lives whispered past acceptance into determination's repose. Together yet apart, her dreams shifted through renewal's embrace intertwined subtly within promise's immediate unveilings. In my advances, the captions closed and curtains unrolled once more in strike-free creative arena where passion and healing swayed hand in hand, unhindered by obstructionist reprisal awaiting nevermore. Skyrim confirmed, the endowment proved a facilitator beyond simple cartographer illuminating ourselves anew. Danielle's final text arrived quietly, its digital specter appearing one gray, unremarkable morning. Paul, I messed up. I miss who we were. I miss you. Her words lingered ephemeral-like, brushing only the surface of what once lay between us. I stood in the sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, allowing the message a moment in the light, understanding that past isn't forgotten, but neither does it define the present. I weighed my response carefully, a Beethoven pause before the decisive chord. Typed, paused, then replied, I was never beige. You were just colorblind. With a soft exhalation, I watched the screen for the briefest lull, then pressed send, words sealed in finality. Blocked. Silence, now a welcome companion, settled in like the comfort of an old, trusted quilt that wraps only truth around. In the backyard, I had transformed into my haven. Laughter rose, buoyant and sincere, an orchestra of the life I had deliberately chosen and fueled into being. I smiled. Life extended beyond what once was, a horizonless canvas painted not in reflections of a past tense but vibrant, harmonious tones meant for the unbound future.